very warm welcome. The time has now come to leave the current world and move into the world of startups. So the world of startup is a different realm altogether. It's a world full of uncertainties where astute investors are trying to figure out certainties. It's a world where an entrepreneur portrays a dream. It's a world where the vision of the entrepreneurs are subjected to the harsh realities of the financial analysis. It's a world where a unique fusion of art and science can be seen. So in this session, I'll be taking you through the unique blend of art and science that appears in the world of startup. So this entire journey will be taken through 5 steps. In the first step, we'll be looking at what are the valuation drivers. What are the things that investors are primarily looking into the company? What are the parameters on which a startup will get evaluated? So that will set the context for figuring out the right valuation. It will be imperative at this stage to know the difference between pricing and valuation, because both the terms are knowingly or unknowingly used interchangeably in the industry. So not many people understand the fine difference between a pricing and valuation. So we'll spend some time trying to differentiate between the two so that we know when we are talking about the valuation, what exactly are we talking about? The world is full of uncertainties, but still all the investors are trying to figure out and ascribe a value to the dream of an entrepreneur. It's a canvas where the vision appears, but it's full of uncertainties, it's full of probability. The investors with their weird financial analysis tools, they're trying to add some perspective to it. They're trying to quantify, they're trying to make a probabilistic model into a deterministic model. So it's full of principles, it's full of methodologies, the list is infinite. So we will take a broad tour around the principles and methodologies which are followed. That also happens to be the core part of this session. We will look at a couple of examples of the startup valuation, how they have been done to understand the intricacies and the practical aspects of it. And towards the end, we will have our concluding remarks. We will have further resources, exposure to further resources which can add to your value, which can add to your existing learnings of the valuation. So with this, let's dive into the first one. So there are many value drivers. Broadly speaking, if you go through the literature, if you listen to anyone's speech, if you go through the textbooks, the list will run across some 100 parameters. I have tried to combine all of them and group all of them across 6 major buckets. I will show them one by one so that your mind is not cluttered with all of them coming on the slide at once. So probably the most specific and probably the most broad-based value driver is the potential of the startup to scale and grow. Since startups are coming for funding at a very early stage, they might have just an idea, they might have just a proof of concept. It's very difficult to figure out their full potential on the basis of a small idea or on the basis of a simple pilot run. So the investors or the people on the other side of the table, they're always trying to assess whether this business or the proposition that has been put on the table, it has an opportunity, potential to grow and scale up in future. So people will generally look for whether the idea is disruptive or not. Is it going to disrupt any of the existing processes? Is it going to disrupt any of the existing businesses? Has it got something to differentiate itself from the rest of the crowd? Is there a unique, sustainable differentiator? Is this going to grow and make this startup into a billion-dollar company going ahead? The products, the concepts that people are talking about under this startup, what kind of market exists for them? What is the total addressable market? Will market accept this product? So is there a good fit for them? So overall, the ultimate idea here is to figure out that how much disruption it can cause in the short run, in the long run, so that how much value can come on the table. Once that is assessed, the next logical question is that has the startup got the ability to convert this potential opportunity? So is the startup ready to do whatever it takes to convert this small idea and concept into a disruptive business model? So people look at the ability, background of the founders, co-founders. People see if there is an execution team in place, what is the background, how good they are at the problem solving skills. So things may not move the way we are expecting today. So if such a situation comes, is the team equipped enough to handle the situation? Is the team equipped enough to steer through uncertainties and still emerge victorious? So the next assessment happens on the ability, execution capability of the founders, co-founders, because they are the ones, along with their management team, who is going to convert and make the most out of the potential opportunity. People diagnose the business model, revenue model, again, to see, is this solving a real significant problem in the economy? What is the size of the problem? Is the problem recurring in nature, or is it a one-time problem? A recurring problems solving startup is given far more weightage in comparison to a solution which can probably help the economy or which can probably help the crowd or market just one time. Now, everything is still in a very, very fluid and nascent stage. So it's full of risk factors. So any opportunity, any reward that is likely to happen in future is subjected against the risk factors. So the evaluation happens across the risk and reward of the business and the revenue model, the sustainability of the business and the revenue model. It should be a model which should survive the test of time. It should be a model which should be able to emerge victorious through the uncertainties in the entire atmosphere and the environment. It's very difficult to assess them. Subjectivities are involved, but business and revenue models are tested against different scenarios. So we come across, we build up, we simulate, we create multiple scenarios, assign probability to them to see that in the worst case, what is possible out of this, in the best case, what is possible out of it. Any business will have a sustained value proposition if they are creating something around intellectual property rights, because IPRs are going to keep you into the market for a longer period of time than your competitors. So amidst competition, all the investors will like to see what intellectual property rights are getting created in the process. A business proposition which has got potential to create IPRs in the long run will be, of course, getting far more weightage in terms of the valuation than the ones which are just solving a simple problem. So that's the reason why people are now getting attracted a lot. And we are seeing if whatever value propositions coming at the table, can that be magnified further by usage of artificial intelligence or machine learning. So intellectual property rights and the adoption of the technology is a crucial role in the entire assessment of the startup. Another parameter which generally comes into picture is what is the current stage. So is it the current stage generally helps you see how many risks are still expected, how far we have traveled in the journey of the risk. So we look at what were the various stages of funding that were involved, what was the risk then, what was the valuation that was given at that point in time. Now, how far the company has come, how close the company is now, how close the startup is now to the path of profitability, how close they are to achieving their promised unit economics. So the stage of the company will also have a bearing on the overall valuation. The technical integration I have talked partly while I was talking about intellectual property rights, but with the advent of AI, ML, with the advent of ChatGPT, many of the business models are seeing some kind of adverse impacts. So here the attempt is again to see the future sustainability of the business. If any of these things are too like ChatGPT, if it comes into the picture, is it going to bring down the startup? Is it going to adversely impact the idea or the potential that we are estimating at this point in time? So these are broadly 6 buckets. Now, the buckets can be far more than this as well, but by and large, I think 85–90% of the parameters which people will generally look for are getting covered through these parameters. Now, these are again subjected to lots of subjectivity as well as objectivity. So what exactly are the questions people are subjected to in case of startups? So here I am trying to capture the key specific questions against which the business model, against which the idea, the concept, and the startups are evaluated. So the term that we are using very, very frequently, and you must have heard across, the total addressable market. What is the size of disruption? What is the market that you are catering to? What is the market that you are trying to address? Now, what is the current size? Is the market itself growing? Because everyone is looking for an opportunity which has potential to turn into a unicorn. Is the micro trends, is the timing for this startup correct enough? Are you launching a product which is much ahead of time? Are you launching something where there will be a customer intent to adopt? Now, this entire addressable market share will translate into some kind of value if you are able to keep the competitive forces aside. So the next logical question that follows is the space crowded? Because if the space is crowded, there will always be a pressure on the margin. Even if the space is crowded, do you have a differentiator to differentiate yourself from the rest of the cloud so that the competitive forces can be pushed back as and when they appear? Is there an entry barrier? If you are entering into a space which has got a very low entry barriers, then whatever you are doing today is likely to be replicated, copied, or come up in some other form of variation. So competitive forces and how prepared you are to look at the competition, how prepared you are to fight the competition. So there are certain questions around that. All the tools, evaluation techniques are designed in a manner such that we are trying to figure out the sustainability of the startup so that no one likes to invest into a startup which is likely to be subjected to the strong forces of competition, and the potential to die there is, despite funding many startups, they die much before any of the value gets realized. So people have burnt their fingers. We don't get to hear the stories about the startups that have closed down. We mostly get to hear the stories of the startups that are successful. But though there is no organized study, but you have to somewhere take the confidence from the fact that 90% of the startups, they eventually end up failing or getting stuck somewhere in the entire journey. We have talked about the business model. The business model is subjected to the scrutiny. Are the revenues recurring in nature? What is the value proposition? Is the sales cycle long, short, or shorter sales cycles preferred? Because if you are into a longer sales cycle, where probably if you approach a customer today and it takes 3 to 4 months to get converted, you always need a runway of at least 3 months, 4 months before a good amount of revenue start coming in. So length of cycles are tested, they are evaluated before a value is ascribed to the business model. The product acquires the center stage because it's the product which is going to drive the revenue, it's the product which is going to drive the market share, and it's the product which is going to keep the competitive forces away. So the product and the service offering, what kind of market fit it has? Is it scalable? Is it replicable? Can it be replicated from one city to multiple cities? Can it be replicated across India? Has it potential to become international? Can it go global? Any moat? Again, it's the differentiator. Is the product having something to sustain itself in the long run? If the company gains any traction, if there have been pilot runs, what have been the responses to the pilot runs? If it has been launched into a particular city, how people are finding it, how people are accepting it. So that gives us a good clue that once the product goes national, once the product goes international, we will probably end up getting the customer attention that we want. We will end up getting the customer retention that we want. And last but not the least, the questions are, and the due diligence are through financial statements. So what had been the prior rounds? What had been the promised numbers at that point in time? Had that been achieved or not? Has the burn rate come down or not? Is there a cushion for future dilution? Because startups, there's no certainty that whatever story has been told to you will eventually get fulfilled. So there may be a funding requirement coming up quite shortly in future. So if the funding requirement comes in, if the startup goes into the capital markets again, is there a cushion for future dilution? So these are very specific questions. The list of the questions can run in an infinitely long presentation, but these are 18, 20 good questions which are generally asked. And this helps people like us to figure out if there is a significant value in the entire proposition. So we are now aware of what will drive the value. So let's spend a little time on on the difference between the two terms that are very, very prevalent in the industry, the pricing and valuation. Pricing is something which is quite simple in comparison to the broad-based valuation term. In terms of the complexity, pricing is quite simple. It's quite easy to arrive at in comparison to a valuation, which is very, very detailed, which requires you to be patient before it can be realized. So there are umpteen examples where people know quite a lot about pricing. People know quite a lot about the pricing methodologies, but people are not able to still assess the valuation. So it's quite good to know a broad differences between the two. So pricing is primarily a number which is based on what other people are paying for similar assets. So most of the time, a similar assets which are getting sold in the market, people generally use that as a benchmark to assign a price to whatever asset or business they are looking at. Pricing is derived on the basis of matrix. It's a very simple process. It's a very intuitive process. And most of us, we end up doing it most of the time, knowingly or unknowingly. When we go to buy a mobile phone, when we go to buy another laptop, we already carry a perspective on the prices. We already have some pricing range in our mind that if I'm looking at this version of Apple iPhone, if I'm looking at this version of Android phone, then probably the price should be in around this. The valuation, on the other hand, is very, very difficult to quantify. It's an assessment of the hidden potential, the intrinsic capability of the organization. It's the hidden potential of the team. It's the hidden potential of the idea. The idea, the team may not be giving you any clue today that what lies in the store. It's very similar to looking at our kids. When the kid is in pre-primary, when the kid is in a primary school, we don't know how much potential the kid has. Once we complete the journey, once he graduates and undergoes a post-graduation program, then his potential starts showing up. But when he was a kid, it's very difficult to ascribe what kind of value he will end up creating in future. It's very similar to what we are seeing here in case of a startup valuation. In a nascent stage, they may not cast the shadow before. They may not give you the full exposure of the potential they can bring on the table in future. But the valuation is very specifically that particular art. The valuation is primarily an attempt to figure out the intrinsic hidden potential of the entire startup. So if you are trying to figure out something that is hidden inside the system, of course, you need to have a very, very deeper understanding of the entire system, entire ecosystem. So it requires you to look into the assumptions. It requires you to have a very, very broader understanding of the principal underlying value creation drivers. Again, since we are trying to figure out something that is hidden, the assessment criteria is not going to be simple. It's going to be a very, very complex assessment tool. It's going to be very, very challenging process. It's going to be a very, very long journey. So valuation is far more conceptual subject, which will require great effort to get quantified. In addition, in comparison, the pricing is a far simple and intuitive term. It's quite easy to come up with a price, but it's very, very difficult to come up with a valuation. Unfortunately, both the terms are used quite frequently, interchangeably in the industry, but all the astute investors who are looking at the valuation, who are looking at the startups, they are making an attempt to figure out the valuation. And that's where the focus should be. The prices can always be figured out on the basis of the comparative asset. The prices can always be determined using a metric, but those are the current performances. The valuation is mostly futuristic. It's mostly dependent upon the potential, the hidden potential. And that's the reason why it becomes almost very, very difficult to hunt for a unicorn. All the companies which have become unicorn today, I'm not sure if any of the investors had a feeling or even a broader sense that these will eventually end up becoming a unicorn. It's very, very difficult to figure out a unicorn today. In order to figure out a unicorn, in order to develop a unicorn, you need to be very, very patient. You need to pass through lots of cumbersome tools. You need to pass through lots of challenging business environment. It requires patience. It's going to be a long-term game. Having said that, we will deep dive into these two parameters once again so that we know what we are talking about in the subsequent slides about the valuation. So prices are mostly determined by demand and supply factors. It's a popular chapter one of microeconomics, economics E101, where you get to see the demand curve and the supply curve. Wherever it interacts, it ends up giving you the price. It's the equilibrium price point. The price point can change depending upon certain market trends. It can change depending upon the sentiments. It can change depending upon the investor's confidence or probably the lack of the confidence in the market. Any news, any information about the economy, about the buoyancy in the economy, about the recession in the economy, any news, any information that directly or indirectly, adversely or strongly impacts the company that we are looking at will automatically change the price, will automatically change the range of the prices in which the company should be trading or the asset should be trading. Financial results, any financial issues, and that's the reason why most of the time when the results come, you will see that the prices swing. So here we are talking about the prices. The valuations are by and large not impacted by what is happening in the short term. The valuation is impacted mostly by your long-term sustainable features. They are impacted by the earnings, the quality of the earnings, the sustainability of the earnings, your future projection on the sales volume, your future projections about the market share. Do you have the competitive advantage that will make you a horse in the long run? So it's derive its basis on the analyst opinion. It derives on the basis of the recommendations. It derives its basis on the outcomes of the due diligence. So it takes a final call on the current and the expected future financial as well as operating metrics. So the value may not get impacted by the short-run parameters. Values are necessarily impacted by the long-run parameters, something that differentiates you from the rest of the crowd, something that helps you uncover the hidden potential. So the entire discussion can be very, very conveniently summarized by the famous line from Warren Buffett: price is what you are paying today. Price is what you are paying in the immediate run. Price is something that you are quantifying today. Value is something that what you are going to get in future. So a good deal, as per him and as per all the valuation expert, will be a deal which promises to, or which is likely to give you value which is more than the current price today. So in this journey, we all are trying to figure out the good deals. We all are trying to come up with the opportunities where probably we end up getting more value than the price. So now this should be able to set the context and should have clarified the difference between the price. In this entire session, we are looking at the value valuation and not necessarily the pricing. Now that we have understood the key differences between the two, the time has now come to look into the challenges that we are facing in the world of valuation, the principles followed, and the methodologies that have been adopted. So the challenges in the startup valuation is primarily driven by the fact that there is lack of data. There is a lack of transparency. Even if data is shared, it might not be complete. It might not be adequate. The entire storyline is there. The storylines will have uncertain forecast. The company might have been through a limited operations, and the period of operations may not be good enough, may not be adequate enough to take a call on the operating performance likely to come in future. In some cases, even the proof of concept might not have developed. It must just be an idea. In many cases, the proof of concept may be there, but the proof of concept would have been tested into a very limited market set. You don't know whether the similar kind of responses will come or not once the company goes to other states, goes to other cities, it goes on national expansion. There is always lack of objective data. So it's full of challenges. I mean, there are many more challenges. I'm very sure some of you would have also encountered other than what I'm writing here. If I start writing all of them, I think, my presentation and the time allotted to us will fall short. So since there are many challenges, so of course there will be a bridge between these challenges and the eventual methodology that will get developed. We call them principle. So the general broad principle that's followed in the industry is that we are beside looking at what is happening currently, a higher weightage or a higher importance is given to the potential, what potential it brings on the table. So analysis will be centered mostly around the growth potential. What will happen in the future? What are the market forces you are getting subjected to? There will be lots of analysis across qualitative factors. So these are the principles where by using which people are trying to figure out some certainty, some determinism in the entire otherwise chaotic world. So principles have been designed, and there are again many principles, and it's very difficult to point out which principle might have been applied to which methodology. But these principles bridge the gap between the challenges existing, and they have eventually ended up giving us various valuation methodologies. So again, the list of the valuation methodologies and the principles that are going to get deployed, that have been deployed and that are going to get deployed in the valuation startups, this is an infinite list. There is no one specific method that will end up giving you a yes or a no answer. There is no one method that will end up telling you that this startup has a potential to turn into a unicorn or not. Most of the time, an analyst or an investor will look at a combination of principles. They will like to assess the same company through multiple valuation methods to probably cater to all the uncertainties, to look at all the scenarios. So an analyst will usually use a combination of these principles and methodologies to assess the value. Let's get into the valuation methods, and that also happened to be the core of the session here. So the valuation methods that are often used in practice, they are derived or they have been set in place based on different stages of the startup. And people can have different perspective to look at it, but I think that the best justice to the valuation method is done if we map it to the different stages of the startup. So depending upon which stage the startup in, depending upon which stage the company is currently passing through, different methods of valuation have come up. So here an attempt has been made to map the valuation methodology to the stage of the startup. So if the company is still in an idea stage, or if the company is still in a seed funding stage, if the company is a pure startup where the cash flows are either not there at all, or if at all there are cash flows, they are just negative. There is either no forecast available, or even if the forecast data is there, it's very limited and its quality is not something that can be relied upon when I'm looking at a very long run perspective of the organization. So the methods which are quite popular here are fixed ranges methods. We will talk about them in the subsequent slide. Then there's a cost approach method. Then there's a scorecard valuation method. They are full of subjectivity. Multiple parameters are put aside. Some weightages are given, some scores are given, and they are added together to arrive at a valuation. They are mostly a combination of art and very little combination of science. Once the company moves into the early growth stage, once the company moves into an expansion stage, when we start seeing limited operation, when we start having some limited historical data, where the cash flows might still be negative, or they might have started showing signs of turning positive. In such a cases, the two very principal methods that come into valuation, they are VC method, the venture capital method, and the discounted cash flow method, which is also popularly known as DCF method. In the sustainable growth stage, when you have already lots of historical data, you have already completed a couple of years of operation, when the historical data is good enough to show some of the emerging trends, where rational investors start seeing positivity that whatever trends have been there in the past has potential to get replicated in the future as well. Time is ripe, or the situation is ripe to apply another very popular tools of method of valuation, which is a market multiples. It's very difficult to understand about each method in an 1 hour session, but there are further reading materials, there are further speeches and videos that you can watch out for them. So I'll quickly take a broad overview of each of the method to set the context so that you know how much art and science are required in each of these methods. So in the fixed ranges method, the investors or the incubators, they generally propose or a take or leave kind of investment. They themselves arrive at a particular value and they will propose the value. They will say that this is the valuation at which I am willing to come for this kind of stake. You will mostly see this happening in all the episodes of Shark Tank, where probably as soon as the entrepreneur pitches for the idea, the participating investors, they immediately come up with a valuation. They say that I'm willing to put this much money for this much stake. These are the fixed ranges method, where people generally end up aggregating the value on the basis of certain success factors, on the basis of certain listing criteria. So we will talk about two popular methods, the first one being the Berker's approach. So in the Berker's approach, we are valuing the startup based on assessment across 5 key success factors. Here the valuation is capped at 2.5 million. So we pick up one success factor, we assess whether the startup is performing or is likely to perform across that idea or not. So for example, the first idea is the startup having a very sound idea. So merely on the basis of soundness of the idea, the investor will end up adding a value somewhere from 0 to 0.5 million. Then the evaluation moves to the next success factor. Here, has the startup produced a prototype? This is primarily to reduce the technology risk. So this is an assessment of technological risk associated with the startup. Depending upon what is the progress in that, again, another valuation in the range of 0 to 0.5 will be added to it. Similarly, the third parameter comes, that is the quality of the management. It's primarily to reduce or assess the execution risk, the operating risk of the idea. The fourth parameter is the strategic relationship. This is to reduce the market risk. Is the company prepared, or is the company in a good enough situation to expand, grow? And the last one is the product rollout. So these 5 success factors are identified and the companies are evaluated against that. And for each one of them, a bucket of $0 to $0.5 million is added to the valuation. Again, lots of subjectivity is involved. It's more of an art than a science, because the only science over here is that once you have assigned the number, you have to just add them up. So this is the Berker's method. Valuation range is assigned to the startup on the basis of 5 different parameters, to what stage they have into, what kind of risk reduction has happened. So it's primarily the assessment of the riskiness of the entire idea, riskiness of the entire value proposition. Another method in the same category, fixed range method, is the risk factor summation approach. Now, this is again a very, very detailed approach full of subjectivity. It's again based upon risk factors, very similar to the Berker's method, but slightly different approach. So here we generally start with the industry average valuation. So the industry average pre-money valuation of the startup is ascribed. Then the startup is subjected to a rigorous test across 12 risk factors. A detailed list of risk factors will come subsequently. Then all the risk factors are assessed, and again, a rating is assigned. It can be 0, it can be 1, it can be 2. A rating is assigned from -2 to +2. Now, for every minuses, certain valuation is deducted. For every pluses, certain valuation is added. To all these risk factors, the summation of that ends up giving us an adjustment. This adjustment is added to the pre-money valuation that we have found out in step 1 to end up coming to the valuation of the startup. So I have shown an illustration here. So these are the 12 risk factors that are considered in step 2. Each risk factors are assigned a rating from -2 to +2. A negative rating will lead to a subtraction in the valuation. A positive rating will lead to an addition to the valuation. +1 means plus 0.25 million, +2 means plus 0.5 million, -1 means minus 0.25 million. So assessment will be done across all the 12 risk factors. The values will be put here. They will be just added. So in this example, you can see that based on the rating, the adjustment adds up to a total value of 0.25 million. If you are looking at a startup into an industry where the pre-money average valuation turns out to be 2.5 million, then this 0.25 million will be added on account of adjustment to the pre-money valuation. And so for this case here, for the example here on this slide, the total pre-money valuation will turn out to be $2.75 billion. So it's again full of subjectivity. It's more based on the assessment across the risk parameters. So it will definitely have biases. It will definitely have subjectivity. It will have an upward bias. It will have a downward bias, but it has very high level of subjectivity. Another method that is quite popular is the cost approach. Here, the idea is that investor is willing to cover the entire cost that have already been incurred by the startup to come to the current stage. So all the costs are identified, all the activities that have been undertaken by the startup are identified, a figure is quantified across each one of them, and then we add up. So the perspective that investor is putting through over here is that this is the total cost that you have incurred to come to this stage. So your valuation should be a figure very close to this number. So all the expenditures which the startup has incurred right from the scratch to the current stage, which can be a setup cost, which can be recruitment, which can be the total compensation paid to the team, the development of the product, the implementation of the product, the inventory that has been put in place, the rent that they have paid. So most of the tangible asset creation, most of the tangible value creation that has happened so far on the cost basis, they are added together. The unfortunate part is that it does not assign any weightage to the intangible assets or the intangible value that the company would have created so far. It also, in a way, completely gives no credit to the overall potential or the future growth possible with this particular startup. So this method, by definition, since it's not giving any weightage to the future potential, it's mostly on the basis of the total cost that has been incurred here. It's likely to generate a lower valuation to startup. It's likely to underestimate the venture's worth potential, but this is also a very, very realistic picture in a way. One way to look at the valuation is of course, the total cost that you have incurred. So why pay a price significantly different from the cost that you have incurred so far? So this is the primary angle in this particular method. The next method is a scorecard valuation method. Here again, multiple factors are listed on the left-hand side. Weightage is assigned. Then the company is evaluated across each of these comparison factors, and a score is provided. So if the strength of the management team turns out to be better than what industry average has, if the strength of the management team is excellent, then they will end up getting a score more than 100%. If startup operates in a market where the size of the opportunity, where the size of disruption is significantly big, the target score will exceed 20%. Sometimes the target score will even be lesser than 100%. So the score is multiplied with the weights that have been assigned to them, and eventually a weighted score is arrived at. So here, the example that you see on the screen, the comparison factors, there are 7 comparison factors that have been listed here. The comparison factors can be even more. A weight has been assigned, a score has been assigned, and the weight and the score has been multiplied to get the weighted score in the rightmost column, and they have been added. So here the score turns out to be 1.24. So the baseline valuation, which is 10 million, 5 million, so whatever was the baseline valuation before the assessment started, that's multiplied by the weighted score. So let's say that before assessment, we had a baseline valuation of 10 million. So this score of 1.24 will get multiplied to that $10 million to arrive at a valuation of $12.4 million for this particular case here. So the important thing for you to understand, or for all of us to understand here, is the methodology and not necessarily the final output. Since there are multiple factors involved here, so like any of the previous methods, this is also a very subjective and biased method. It tries to capture the potential through your management execution capability. It tries to give weightage to the opportunity, but still it remains a unique blend of art and science, because it's very difficult to assign a score against each of these parameters in the absence of any trend or in the absence of any historical data. They are very qualitative factors, so it's very difficult to quantify them. As the company matures, when we start seeing some visibility in the cash flow, if not in the current cash flow, at least in the future cash flow, where we know that at least at the end of the investment horizon, there can be some positive cash flow, or the company will turn out to be profitable, or the company will have some quantifiable number. So the venture capital method first tries to value the entity after a couple of years. So what is the exit value? So let's say that if I'm a venture capital, I'm looking at the valuation today, I'm not able to get any clue. But 5 years down the line, 6 years down the line, after an investment horizon of whatever investment horizon they have, will they turn profitable? If they turn profitable, what will be their earnings? They apply a multiple to that earning, the industry average multiple, to end up getting the valuation 5 years down the line. That valuation is discounted back today on the basis of the required ROI. So if the venture capital wants the investment to grow 10x, if the valuation there at the time of exit is Z, then Z will be divided by 10 to arrive at the implied valuation today. So that is the valuation today. That is the valuation that venture capital will ascribe to the startup today. So in this example, through a series of numbers, the venture capital arrives at the pre-money valuation of 2 million, or the post-money valuation of 2 million plus an investment of 3 million. So the venture capital today will necessarily ask for 1 divided by 3, 33% stake today, so that the opportunity generates 10x return for, or at the end of the investment horizon, that is 5 years. So here also, of course, there is some visibility, or there is some certainty, or there is some assessment of the cash flow that is likely to happen, or the valuation metric that is likely to happen at the end of year 5. But again, these are based on assumptions. There is no way one can be reasonably or very strictly sure of the operating metric or the financial metric 5 years down the line. This model is very, very prevalent, and I think it's very intuitive, and it ensures a fair return to the venture capital. It's not a guarantee that eventually whatever you are thinking will be realized, but this method is slightly more scientific than all the methods that we have seen before. The rational extension of this model is that we are looking at a startup which has come to a stage which is generating a cash flow, let's say, every year. So we look at all the potential cash flows that it can generate in the intermittent year or at the end of the investment horizon. So we forecast the cash flows. The cash flows can be negative here. So one key requirement here is that the discounted cash flow method of valuation will end up giving you a right value, or will end up giving you mathematically a good number if the cash flows turn positive during the investment period, during the horizon, and it remains positive thereafter. So here, all the intermittent cash flows from year 1 to year 5 will be assessed on the basis of year 5 cash flow, and on the basis of a terminal growth rate. We generally end up figuring out the terminal value. The terminal value is again discounted backward. So the principal concept that is being pushed here through the discounted cash flow method is the very, very popular concept of valuation, that the value of any asset, the value of any business, the value of any company is nothing but the present value of all the future cash flows that it can generate. Now, even though it's a very elaborate process, it's a very cumbersome process which cuts through the assumptions of the company, the primary driver of the valuation remains the terminal growth rate and the discount rate. And there can be enough debate, and the literature books are full of pages on these two topics, that what should be the right discount rate, what should be the right terminal growth rate. Typical discount rates that are again used for the purpose of discounted cash flow methods of valuation will range anywhere from as high as 50% to 80% to even 100% in a few cases. So I have put across a table here based on an article from PwC here. So what kind of discount rates are prevalent in the industry depending upon different stages here. It's a very elaborate, scientific, probably the most scientific method of valuation is the discounted cash flow methods of valuation. The comparable methods, I mean, many a times you don't have to do the entire story evaluation from scratch. You look at the mark, you look at the assets, you look at the companies, you look at the businesses which are currently traded in the market. So you use them as a benchmark to value your company. Similarly, you look at previous transactions which might have happened in the same sector, which might have happened to the companies in the similar stage. So you try to figure out the right peer set, then you determine the valuation metric. It can be EV by sales, it can be EV by EBITDA, it can be enterprise value to EBITDA, it can be linked to some operating metric. So EV to per active user, valuation to number of logins, valuation to number of active customers, valuation to your order book. So the valuation is linked to one of the operating or a financial parameter. Those parameters are worked out for the companies which are already trading into the market or for all the transactions that have already happened in the past. Then we end up taking the mean, median, we end up adjusting them for illiquidity, and we use that multiple to value the asset or value the company or the target company in our hand. So these are the shorter methods. These are very quick methods which can end up giving you back of the envelope calculation of the valuation of the company. Once there's a seriousness, this has to be complemented by other methods of valuation as well. So this method links or makes the entire method of valuation quite easy, but nevertheless, it's a very prevalent method in the industry as well. But of course, the real challenge here is to find the right peer set. You may come across a startup, you may come across a company which has got a concept or which has got an idea or which has got a product which is probably not existing in the market. So the real challenge here is to figure out the right peer set to compare. There can be startups, and I've been into a situation where I'm looking at the valuation of startup and I'm not able to find even a single comparable company to compare that startup with. So you will get stuck in similar kind of situation. Therefore, probably you may have to shift to some other method. But in cases where the comparable companies or transactions are available, this is a very simple way to get a back of the envelope calculation and assessment of the valuation of the startup. So having talked about the methodologies and the principles, there are many more other methods. There are many more principles. If I start talking about them, we'll run out of time. But the principal ones, the key ones we have already discussed. And in the process, we have also understood what these methods require as an input before they can be valued. So automatically, we would have already identified certain intricacies, but the time has now come to look at the intricacies as a separate discussion topic. So the graph here is an article that has been picked up from ET-Tech, and I'm sure some of you would have already seen that. Recently, we have seen major markdowns in the valuation by leading investors, leading international investors and the funds. So Pine Labs have been subjected to a down valuation. Farm Easy has been subjected to a markdown. The newspaper in the last, I think in the second half of 2022 and the first half of 2023 is full of the stories of markdowns that has happened across Ola, Byju's. Swiggy valuation was marked down by Invesco somewhere in April, May 2023. So, and the quantum of markdowns, I mean, this graph very beautifully depicts the quantum of markdown. Byju's valuation was marked down by BlackRock from $22 billion to $11.5 billion. There were many other instances of markdowns happening on Byju's as well. Oyo, SoftBank, has marked down the valuation significantly from $9.6, $10 billion to close to $3 billion. These markdowns are happening, which automatically means that there are many more intricacies that are happening in these valuations than what appears to our eyes. Difficulty of valuation is in a way inversely proportional to the maturity curve of the startup. Earlier, you are looking at the startup in the earlier the stage the startup is in, more difficult the valuation is. As the maturity, as the profile of the startup improves, the valuation tends to be more scientific, it tends to be more mathematical. But in the early stages, it's more of an art than of a science. There are many instances where the traditional concepts of valuation is kind of defined. So looking at the Zomato, looking at the Cred, these are the companies which are still making significant operating losses. These are the companies which are still cash flows negative. But look at the success rate of their IPOs. Look at the market cap of these companies. So what necessarily comes out of this entire discussion is that there had been errors in the judgment. The errors in the judgment cannot be avoided. Even though these valuations are probably done by probably the best brains of the world. These are people who are coming from the topmost colleges. These are the people who are supported by probably the best insights. These are the people who have got very sharp tools to assess. These are the people who claim to look at the story and probably dissect it, rip it apart. So there have been instances, and I think these instances are not limited to what cases that I have put in here. In future as well, there will be several instances where probably the judgment, where probably the call, where the valuation ascribed is likely to go down. And it will defy the conventional methods of valuation. It will defy the conventional thought processes that goes into the valuation. So the journey now needs to be concluded by certain learnings that have clearly come out of that session. And we have realized that valuation is of a startup is certainly going to be an interplay of art and science. It's very, very difficult to assign too much weightage to mathematics in this. It's very difficult. It's going to remain an interplay of subjectivity and bias. It's going to be something that is going to give weightage to the qualitative elements to begin with, because there are hardly any quantitative parameters. It's going to be a combination of story supported by numbers, and then the numbers supported by story. So you come up with a story, it needs to be backed by assumptions, it needs to be backed by numbers. You come up with a number, every number needs to have a story behind that. So the traditional approaches are not going to be helpful. In some cases, even the approaches that we have discussed before may not turn out to be single-handedly good enough to value the startup. You may have to end up combining lots of them to ascribe a value which is acceptable to you, which is acceptable to the promoter as well, to the entrepreneur as well. So I will conclude this with a very famous line from Warren Buffett. It's that valuation of a business, it remains part science and part art. And both the factors, objectivity as well as subjectivity, probability as well as deterministic models, they will continue to play the role here. The world of, there is no one such method, there is no one such process, there is no one size that fits all. Every startup is unique. Every startup needs to be subjected to the unique set of testing criteria. They must be subjected to a unique blend of the methods to come at the valuation. Now that we know that it's going to be an art of science and it's going to be a combination, it's going to be a fusion of art and science, it will automatically require support of wisdom. So future wisdom can definitely be gained by going through the textbooks. Future wisdom can definitely be gained by going through courses. So what you see on the screen are the famous textbooks, which can probably help you learn more about the valuation. It's very, very difficult to become an expert in valuation. Even I come across a situation where I'm totally clueless. Even I come across a company where I am just not able to figure out what should be the right value. Even I am looking for help. Even I'm looking for expert opinions. I may go back to the textbook. I may go back to the other analyst opinion. So the entire storyline will remain incomplete unless we mention the valuation gurus of the world. You can look at their videos. You can look at their clips. You can look at their speeches. They are, and they had been, a great driver of value creation and knowledge creation for me myself. I myself have learned several techniques, several mathematics, and several subjectivity into the art of valuation by going through the videos of Warren Buffett. Professor Aswath Damodaran had been a key driving factor in my own life, though I have never met face to face with him. But his lectures, his presentations were very, very good, enriching learning source in my early part of the career. Rakesh Jhunjhunwala is another investor that most of us can correlate with. So these are the further readings. These are the further places where you can gain more wisdom in the entire world of startups. So The concluding remark here is that startup continues to be a realm. It continues to be a world where the dreams, where the vision of an entrepreneur is subjected to the weird tools of financial analysis, where potential meets the reality. It cannot be done by mathematics. It has to be a unique blend of art and science. It requires wisdom, it requires knowledge, and it comes over a time. It comes by reading textbook. It comes by hearing to people who have been into the field. It comes by practicing it, doing it correct, taking exposure, doing it wrong, learning again. So it remains a continuous learning for all of us. With this concluding remark, I think I have come to an end of session.